Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cutler, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. It is good to have you tuning in wherever in the world you are. We're at Chabad of Cary, Cary, North Carolina, and we have a very, very powerful class today on Jerusalem. For all those tuning in, we love hearing that you are with us. Send us a chat, ask questions, and if you appreciate the program, you can donate and allow us to continue doing this week after week on nissancommunications.com. You will see a donate button on the home page. Okay, we're on page 110 for everyone here. And I see a few people coming in, so maybe if you could just give a shout so they know where we are. Okay, so Jay Leno last year was in Jerusalem, and he gave a little performance in Israel, and he did his own routine. Anyone watch it? You saw it, So he said that so many Israeli politicians find themselves behind bars these days. That when you ask an Israeli politician what their cell number is, it means it's something totally different than what it is over here. And then he said that in the list of most popular names in Israel, Noam is number one. Noah for a girl or Noam for a boy. They also have least popular. It's John Kerry. Anyways, so this week's Torah portion is all about Jerusalem. By means of an introduction, interesting story happened, 1995, I believe. The then chief rabbi of Israel, today he's the rabbi in Tel Aviv. His name is Rabbi Lau. He's a Holocaust survivor. He had an audience with Mubarak in Egypt and sort of peaceful relations, something with the Israel-Egypt relations. And while he was there, he met with other government officials, including the Grand Mufti. Mufti of Egypt. And have the fellow's name over here, Sheikh Al-Azhar. And he meets with this fellow, and they have a peaceful conversation, brotherhood, peaceful conversation. It's going pretty well for a while. And at the end of the conversation, Rabbi Lau turns to this Mufti, and he says, you were so gracious to have us over here. I would love to return the favor and have you come visit me in Jerusalem. And he turns and he says, I can't do that. He says, why not? He says, I will not go to Jerusalem as long as my stamp on my passport is an Israeli one. And he says, really? He says, yeah, until there's a Palestinian stamp on my passport, I cannot return. And it was very, and he turns to them, he says, I know you're a scholar, and I know you're a biblical scholar, both of the Quran as well as the Jewish texts. How many times does Jerusalem appear in the Tanakh? So the 24 books of the Bible. Look, I didn't know the answer. I don't think he knew the answer offhand. Anyone want to give a guess? Jerusalem in the Tanakh.
1 or 2 times.
821 times.
Wait.
821 times.
13.
Okay, I don't know if there's any meaning to 821. Okay. And then he turns around to him and he says, how many times is it mentioned in the Quran? And he knew the answer. The answer to that actually is 0, and it's well known. And he says, how can you not acknowledge our rights to the land, to Jerusalem? At least we can have differences of opinions, but to not acknowledge there was a Jewish history there is very, very disturbing. Unfortunately, the meeting sort of ended there. I mention that because it is mentioned 821 times in the Tanakh, but here is the mystery. How many times is it mentioned in the 5 books of Moses and the Chumash? And had Sheikh Al-Azhar turned the question back to him, maybe he didn't know, that would have been a challenging one.
Sure, because it's called the place.
The place. We're going to have it. We're going to see in a moment. The answer actually is 0. And that is my question. Why would it be that 821 times it is mentioned in the Tanakh, but in the 5 books of Moses itself, it is absent? Now, you might want to give the answer that perhaps at that point in history, It wasn't yet known by
By
Jerusalem.
that name, yeah.
But if you look in archaeology, in Egyptian archaeology, this predates the Exodus hundreds of years. We already have mentions of, it's not called, it's called something very, very similar.
So you mean to say that in the Torah it says the
Correct.
place? The place.
Zero. The place that I will choose. We're
Right,
gonna read that in a moment.
Okay.
And yeah, it's not that it's not referenced at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, interesting. In Egypt archaeology, there was a kind of thing where if a country under you revolted, they would have these clay figurines that they would keep, and with the names of the leaders on it. And their kind of voodoo was if the country revolted, you would smash the clay figurine and hope that would also result in bad luck for that country. And we have Yerushalimum. Yerusalimu. The point is, there's something very similar in Egyptian. This predates the Exodus story, so there is that name out there. If the name is out there, why would the Chumash not have it? And that is going to be our question today. Hal's going to have an answer already.
Is
Yes.
Jeshurun? I thought that was Jerusalem.
Oh, that also is
named
mentioned.
after Jacob.
Yeah. So those names are you mean in the Torah or in archaeology?
Oh, I thought it was in Torah.
What
I
was
thought
which?
they called,
Yeshurun.
there was Jeshurun.
Oh, Jeshurun was Yeshurun, but that word Jeshurun is
not
a
Jerusalem.
different. No, that refers to the Jewish people. That is different than Jerusalem. Yeah.
I'm wondering if during the wanderings, God did not want the Israelites to know where the place was yet until he revealed it.
Mm.
But if he gave the name of a very real place, then it would be pre-revealed.
Interesting. And what would be the downside of that?
Well, also the residents might prepare, but
That's interesting. You might have more confrontation of that spot.
Right, but still,
That's interesting.
if God's choosing to reveal the place when He's choosing to reveal it, He shouldn't pre-name it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
also,
yeah. Is there anyone that's listening online that would like to give a suggestion to this answer why Jerusalem would be absent in name? Please write in the chat box.
About
Yeah.
I've got one. I've got one for you.
All right.
Politically correct.
Go for it.
That's what I was saying. Politically correct. They didn't want to mention it. I don't know.
Oh, that way. All right. That way we wouldn't point to the fact that it's mentioned a zillion times in our Torah. All right.
so who actually named Jerusalem at the time of the prophets? Did King
David?
himself
You-
name Yerushalayim?
You know what? What is the first time in the Tanakh that it is mentioned? I need a computer and I can find the answer to that question.
Is it in
Oh, it's in
Tehillim?
Tehillim
No,
all
I mean,
the
is
time.
that the first time?
No. It's in Kings. I think it might be in Judges, but I don't know if it's in Joshua. It would be interesting to see what is the first of the 821. I don't know the answer to that. That would be homework for me. I don't know the answer. But what is mentioned in the Parsha, and the context here, there are many mitzvahs in the Parsha that discuss Israel. Unique mitzvahs that only apply in Israel. We already had sabbatical year much earlier in the Torah, but there are many agricultural charities that only applied in the land of Israel. If you were a farmer in Israel, it was very complex. Charity was something that was fixed, certain amounts you had to give. You didn't have an IRS that made sure that it was done, but there was these 10% that you had to give. And it wasn't just one 10%, it was often two. 10% to the poor people, 10% to the Levites. Some years it was 10% that you would eat yourself in Jerusalem, which is interesting. You would take 10% of all your crops, and when you went up to Jerusalem 3 times a year, you would bring that produce with you and you would eat it there and share it with the residents, sort of to help the people there. And you're going to ask
And
me an
that was
obvious
your
question,
tithe?
what would happen if it got rotten, right?
That was your time?
So that was, no, in addition to that, there was another 10% that was given.
That was to enforce festivity.
There we go. Enforce festivity, and also in the event that it would get rotten, you would sell the food, take the money, and with the money, buy more food in Jerusalem when you come down, and that would also increase festivity as well as stimulate the Jerusalem economy. There are many laws. Another one of the laws was that up until this point in the Torah, whenever a Jew wanted to offer an offering, they could do it in their backyard. Or they could just do it wherever they wanted. And it was centralized once the Jews established home in Jerusalem, except Jerusalem's not mentioned. All right, Anne, why don't you begin? Text 1, this is from Deuteronomy 12.
But only to the place which the Lord your God shall choose from all the tribes to set his name there. You shall inquire after his dwelling and come there. And there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes and the separation by your hand, and your vows and your donations and your firstborn of your cattle and of your sheep. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice in all your endeavors, you and your households, as the Lord your God has blessed you. And it will be that at the place the Lord your God will choose in which to establish his name, there you shall bring all the things that I am commanding you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the separation by your hand, and the choice of vows which you will vow to God, but only in the place God will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer up your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you.
In the place that God will choose. That line, Hamakom, the place, Asher Yivchar Adonai, that God will choose, appears 20 times in this week's Torah portion. So for heaven's sake, just mention the name of the place. Just say Jerusalem. Why does it say the place that I will choose? And that is the surprising question, why it would be that way.
What does it mean, the separation by your hand?
So there were many types of offerings that the Jews would give 10%, and they would put 9 to the side, and they would take the 10th. So they had to give 10th of their animals, believe it or not. So you would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, this 10th one, that one is going to tzedakah, that one is going to charity. And they would physically designate that one. So you had many laws that Jerusalem was important to, where you would bring your charity. It is not mentioned. Now, where in the Torah, before the Exodus story, do we have an event that happens in Jerusalem, and what is it called there? Okay, what stories in the Torah happened at that spot? Yeah.
Creation of the world, Abraham sacrificing Isaac.
All right. What's the place called there? The story of the binding of Isaac.
Is that Hashem Yirah?
Yeah. So Adonai Yirah. So we have the word Yirah in it. All right, which means awe of God. And look at text 2a. This is another story where Abraham tries to fight. He does fight a battle to rescue his nephew, and he saves a bunch of kings in the process. One of those kings was called Malki-Tzedek. And what is the name of the town that Malki-Tzedek ruled over? Text 2a. Judy, why don't you read?
2A or
2a.
And Malki-Tzedek, the king of Shalem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest to the Most High God.
So we have the king of Shalem. So Shalem is mentioned, due to be as well. Yeah, and Abraham.
And Abraham named that place, God will see, Yirah, as it is said to this day, on the mountain, God will be seen.
So we have Yirah and we have Shalem. Put together Yirah Shalem and you get Yerushalayim. So we see mentions in the Torah that those names had somewhat existed beforehand. And so it almost seems that the Torah is purposely leaving it blank. Not because it didn't exist, not because it wasn't called that, not because the Torah doesn't realize that's what it's called, but he calls it Yirah. And the Midrash even writes, text 2c.
Abraham called it Yirah, as it is stated, and Abraham named that place God will see, Yirah. Shem called it Shalom, as it is stated, and Melchizedek, the king of Shalom. God said, if I call it Yirah, as did Abraham, Shem, who is a righteous man, will have qualms. If I call it Shalem, as did Shem, Abraham, who is a righteous man, will have qualms. So I will use the name of both men and call it Yirah Shalem, Yerushalayim.
So the Midrash says it was a combo of both. Our producer over here, Amnon, did a little search, took away my homework, beginning of Joshua. It's already called Yerushalayim. So it doesn't take long before Joshua chapter 10, before it is mentioned, but again, it's absent in the 5 books of Moses. It is not because the Torah does not mention any cities, all right? I think it's this week's Torah portion, yeah. Later in this week's Torah portion, just to go fast, text 3, it mentions when you go to the land of Israel, there's going to be a mountain called Gerizim and another mountain called Eval, and it gives the coordinates of that place. It's near Gilgal, it's near Moreh. So it's not as if the Torah is silent about geography. Often the Torah will specifically mention both the name of the place as well as where it's located. It seems to purposely not mention that here. Maimonides is the first to raise the question. In the Guide to the Perplexed, text 4a, Hal, he asks this question, the one that we've been focused on.
Why is the name Jerusalem not mentioned explicitly in the Torah and only alluded to the words the place where God had chosen?
Okay. Welcome. Good to see you.
There's a
Bring
chair.
another chair.
Chair right there.
So why is it not? We are now going to have 3 answers for Maimonides. Maimonides doesn't just ask the question, he answers the question. Those are going to be more of the technical answers to the question. There's going to be a spiritual answer as well. Maimonides gives practical ones. Brian, I think you'll like these. These are down to
There we
earth,
go.
practical,
Go ahead.
and then Amnon. Anyone else have any other, before we do
Not
Maimonides'
yet. Nope.
answers?
No,
No
not
other.
yet.
Hal.
It's not the name of the place that's important. It's that it's a place that God chose. God chooses many places to be holy. This was just happened to be named by man afterwards. They gave the place a name.
Okay.
One place a name.
So, but forget about the question, why isn't it called Jerusalem? Let's focus on what is it called? The place that God will choose. That's going to be important to this discussion. Absolutely. Very good. Anyone else?
Does it have more than one name?
There are times where Tzion, Zion, later is a reference to Jerusalem.
And
Moriah, okay. So there are other names for it. But then again, that's also absent in this week's Torah portion. It's not like those names are mentioned. The question we have today is over and over in the Bible, in the Torah, it doesn't mention Jerusalem by name. It says the place that God will choose 20 times in this week's Torah portion, and it doesn't mention it by name. Very, very odd, especially because we mentioned in the latter books of the Torah, 821 times Jerusalem is mentioned. So it seems to be a purposeful omission. Maimonides answers. Why don't you go?
Oh.
Text
4b.
4b.
There are, in my opinion, 3 reasons for this. First, if the nations would know that this place is the one designated by the Torah from the entire world, they would occupy it and battle over it most perseveringly.
Someone around the room mentioned that. Let's avoid making a big to-do over Jerusalem. That way, when the Jews will conquer it, it'll be more peaceful. If the nations of the world know that this is ground zero, there's going to be a lot more opposition to that. Right?
Which it is today.
Well, exactly. This did a lot of good, didn't it?
At the time it did.
At the time. There we go. 2.
Secondly, those who were then in possession of it might lay waste to it and destroy it as much as possible. Thirdly, and chiefly, every one of the 12 tribes would desire to have this place in its borders and under its control. This would lead to division and discord, such as were caused by the desire for the priesthood, the Korach saga. Therefore, it was commanded that the temple should not be built before the appointment of the king, in order that the choice be made unanimously under the direction of the king, thus eliminating the discord.
So he talks about peace over here. It's interesting. What other countries have the capital not in a province or a state? You know, like we have DC not in any. And are there other countries that have a similar model to that?
I don't think so. But
You know, like
my
Australia,
my
Canberra.
geography is really bad.
Right. So Jerusalem, there wasn't states, but what there was is each one of the 12 tribes had a province. Each one of the 12 tribes had a region of the land of Israel. Jerusalem is not in any of the one, sort of like DC.
Is
Is in-
It wasn't in Judah.
is
It was a
Jerusalem
combination
encompassed-
of
Is it surrounded by one territory, like
2.
like the Vatican is surrounded by Italy?
Yeah. So you have sort of Vatican Italy, or I guess even DC, Maryland, Virginia.
Okay.
This is Judah, Benjamin. Because keep in mind, those were the two nations that were in that part of Israel. Then you have the 10 tribes.
Okay.
So you have Judah and Benjamin there, but neither had claim to Jerusalem. So that was the third. Sadly, we see all three of these today, or the lack thereof. The fact that there is so much conflict over Jerusalem. The fact that even until today, efforts are made to destroy archaeology that connects Jews to Jerusalem. This year, actually, we're having someone come down and give a presentation on archaeology in Jerusalem, which will be very interesting. Yeah, God willing, in January. And the third one, even within the Jewish people, discord when it comes to Jerusalem. There is a famous story about Jerusalem that I was very disappointed when I found out it was a legend. It never happened. You might have heard of it before. This is an old story that I was told as a kid. Maybe you heard it before, Judy. And that is, there were these two brothers, and one had a lot more means than the other one did, but one had a larger family than the other one did. And one night, the guy says, "You know what, my brother, I feel so bad he doesn't have, wife or children. At least I can make him happy and give him some food." So he picks up and gives him some of his bundles of wheat. The other brother says he has so many mouths to feed in his house, I'll pick up and I'll give him bundles. And the next day they woke up and they're the same. And they're like, "Hey, what happened?" And they did it a second time and the third time, and night number 4, they bump into each other and they hug and embrace. And it finishes off there. God decided this will be the place, the city of love, Jerusalem. Story never happened. In fact,
That's
it's
where they built the temple. That was the site
correct.
of the
So
temple.
that is the way the story is.
Yeah.
There's a modern day version of that story where the same thing happens, except the brothers are stealing from each other every single day. And they say, here's where they built the Knesset. In any event, the story was found in a French book and in an Arab book and doesn't have Jewish origins. And in any
It's a
event,
nice feel-good
it's a nice feel-good story that I must have told Hebrew kids, school kids, myself a billion times before I found out that the story never happened.
You didn't see those kinds of things between brothers in the Torah anyway. If you look in the Torah, there's so much sibling rivalry.
That's true. There's a lot of sibling rivalry, so you would understand why the story spread, because Jerusalem is supposed to be a city that embodies peace. So those are Maimonides' 3 answers to the questions. Again, out of those 3, which one seems to resonate the most?
Second one.
All right. Anyone else?
I think it was because of so the tribes wouldn't fight.
Yeah.
Above all, God
You know,
wants us to be peaceful. So-
right. And, sadly, even today,
Yeah.
within the Jewish people, events just last week or 2 weeks ago, where you have that. It's so, so sad. If there's one thing that's important, it's one thing if we have disharmony from without, but when we have it from within, that's truly tragic. That is absolutely tragic. And
And
that's
it
a
is
very,
our history.
unfortunately, in each time in our history when we had an erosion from within, that is what led to
Yeah.
problems from without. So that second answer is whatever the third answer, that is very relevant and applicable to today. The Malbim, who was another commentary, gives another answer, page 116. Do you want to read, Ruth?
The location of the temple is called the place where God will choose. Many times in the Torah, indeed, the location was ultimately disclosed through the prophets, as it is stated, and God came to David. And it also states, on the mountain of Moriah, where he appeared to David his father. Regardless, we find that David searched for the place, as it is stated, until I find a place for God. And he did not wait for the prophet to appear to him. David learned this approach from what is stated, you shall seek his presence, where seeking connotes one who searches on his own to find the matter. This, then, is what is stated, seek and find. With these words, we are taught that God would not disclose the secret of the location for the temple through the prophets without the efforts of the people to search for it prior. Appropriate initiative engenders a spirit, thank you, from on high.
That last sentence is nice. We don't wait for miracles. Appropriate initiative from below that arouses God's inspiration from above. So I don't want prophets to tell me where it is. We got to find and seek. Then we will have God's prophecy, at least in biblical times, that will confirm that. But that's the way it works in our life. We make the efforts, God then gives the blessings.
So
yeah.
this is a little bit of a variant of the other thing I was thinking of volunteering for the reason why it wasn't named, is we have a significant degree of our own decision making. And so it could be, there will be a place, but events will shape where it'll be.
Right.
Just like, oh, no, you don't get to go, you're apparently not ready to go into Israel yet, need another 40 years to change your attitude. So we had influence on this.
Right, meaning in the Torah there are certain mitzvot that are from high, but the stories and many of the other parts of the Torah were molded depending on the actions that the people took. History was changed when the golden calf happened, or when the spies happened, or when the infighting happened. So the efforts from below were important in that decision-making process. And we see David going on and on about his search and why he wants to find it. So that would be the fourth answer given by the Malbim. Now we will go to the spiritual answer. Spiritual answer here, it comes from a book that's not very well known. It's written by a 16th century rabbi. His brother was well known. His brother was the rabbi of Prague. The old synagogue in Prague today is still there. It survived the Nazi bombs, one of the few synagogues that did. The legend of the Golem, if you've heard of that, was in that synagogue. His name was the Maharal of Prague. He's quoted all over He had an older brother. His name was Bitzalel. And for some reason, his book is not quoted, but he has a fascinating book called Sefer HaChaim, and he then suggests an answer why Jerusalem is not mentioned. But before he does that, he quotes a disturbing text from the Talmud. And Jews always answer a question with a question, right? We don't just answer a question, we ask another question, and with the second question, we answer the first question. So he starts off asking a question on this text from the Talmud, and he then provides an answer that answers both questions. Here is the text from the Talmud. And before we take it at face value, we'll hear his answer. Here it goes.
Which
Text 8 we're going to go to from the Talmud in Ketubot.
The rabbis taught one should always live in the land of Israel, even in a town where the majority are idolatrous. And one should not live outside the land, even in the town where the majority are Israelites. For whoever lives in the land of Israel may be considered to have a God, but whoever lives outside the land may be regarded as one who has no God, as it is written, to give to you the land of Canaan, to be to you for a God.
They sort of take that verse, giving you the land of Canaan, and I'll be for you a God. And the Talmud makes this little interpretation. When is God for you a God? When you're living in the land of Israel. You're not in the land of Israel. Now, this is not a halacha. In the Talmud, very important, there are laws and there are moral lessons and teachings. And a lot of those are metaphors and what's called agadada. They don't always are understood literally. But this is a very surprising statement. Better to live in the land of Israel with idolaters. Secondly, we have seen over the history many great people who did not live in the land of Israel. And if this was a law, one would expect
like the Baal Shem Tov.
Many people. Now, at certain times in history, it was not, they couldn't go there, right?
So that they had
They had no choice, and even Maimonides himself lives in Egypt because there's tremendous persecution. But there were other times where people could have picked up and moved to Israel, and they did not.
The Rebbe didn't.
The Rebbe did not. Out of all the 7 Rebbes, only one of them even visited Israel, which is another surprise for another class.
But they're equating the fact of living in Israel with having a God.
Right.
Does that mean that all these...
So that's the question. He asks that. So he says, no, it can't be face value over here. We need to understand this differently. And he answers this statement of the Talmud with the other question, why is it that the Torah doesn't specifically mention Jerusalem by name? And how you alluded to it. The Torah says the place that I will choose, okay? There is a physical Jerusalem, and that is a specific city that's located in the land of Israel. And then there's a conceptual Jerusalem. It is a place that God chooses. It is a state of mind. It is a perspective. It is the definition of the word Yerushalayim which means awe of God. It's living in a state where you feel God's presence wherever you go, with this palpable faith of God. Now, the ideal place to have that is where? In Jerusalem, and like we had in last week's Torah portion, that the physical land is conducive to this state of being. However, when not physically living there, you can still be in the place that God will choose. And that depends on your actions, and that depends on the perspective from which you live life. Let's do text 10a and 10b. There's a text from Malachi and then a statement of the Talmud on that. Do you mind please reading 10a?
For from the rising of the sun until its setting, my name is great among the nations, and everywhere offerings are burnt and offered up to my name, yea, a pure oblation, for my name is great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts.
So this verse in Malachi said, my name is great amongst the nations, everywhere offerings are burnt. Now the problem with that is we just had a verse in this week's Torah portion that said, you can't burn offerings everywhere. Even in biblical times, those were limited to Jerusalem, to the temple. So the Talmud, read the next text, 11b.
And everywhere offerings are burnt and offered up in my name. Can it really be everywhere? Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan. This refers to the scholars who devote themselves to the study of the Torah in whatever place they are. God says, I account it unto them as though they burnt and presented offerings in my name.
Okay, so what he's saying is there's the physical Jerusalem and then there's the teachings of the Torah that we can have everywhere. And you ask, there's a beautiful story where Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking to a birthright group in the land of Israel. And they were at the Kotel. And he says, talks to the kids. These are 18, 19, 20-year-olds. He said, touch the stones, okay? You're here. Feel the wall, Isn't it incredible that for 2,000 years we were not able to be here? And yet we came back, and he turns to everyone and he says, where else in the world do you have a people who did not have their home for 2,000 years and then returned to it? Okay? He turns to the crowd, when else do you have that phenomena of people that for 2,000 years did not and returned to it? And it's very true. You don't have that concept because what happened in history is when people lost their land, they lost their identity and who they were, and they assimilated in whatever nation they were. And it's a very true statement that Netanyahu said. But the follow-up question is, why? How could it be that for 2,000 years they did not? And the answer was, because in addition to having a physical homeland, they also had a spiritual homeland. In addition to having a physical temple, they had a spiritual temple, and that is the Ark, that is the Torah, that is what goes everywhere. Because they held on to the portable temple, the spiritual temple, the place that God will choose wherever you are in the world, that allowed them to reclaim the physical Jerusalem as well. And that's true. I mean, otherwise, I think we had in a previous class, even in the temple that the Jews had, the traveling temple, the traveling sanctuary, all the items had sticks to carry. The portable items, the table and the altar, and they all had little sticks. And one of the funny things was, most of the other items, you took off the sticks, the poles, as soon as you camped. But when it came to the Ark, you left the poles on always. If you ever saw a picture of the Ark, it always has a box with two little poles on it. What are the poles for? When the Jews traveled. But they weren't traveling. It was in some of these places for years. They always left the poles on. And one of the interpretations of that is, that's what Torah is. Torah went with the Jews everywhere and needs to be portable. We have an eternal homeland because we had a portable homeland. And that is why Netanyahu says, 2,000 years we're here. It is because conceptually we always had the Torah. And conceptually, Jews, even when they lived elsewhere, their hearts. So he writes in this book, the brother of the Maharal of Prague, text 12 now.
Is that me?
Yeah.
When our sages stated, Whoever lives outside the land may be regarded as one who has no God. They were referring to one who established his permanent residence outside of Israel and wishes to assimilate into the foreign culture. This is implied by the precise wording, Hadar.
It says whoever dar in out of Israel. Dar implies not just living, but a this is who I am kind of thing. Yeah.
Hadar connotes his perspective that the culture outside of Israel should be his home forever, for he desires such a culture and lifestyle. Such a perspective is certainly akin to heresy.
Because they're no longer identifying with the Jerusalem of within. Yeah.
But one who forever pines for the ultimate redemption and has his eyes and heart set on Jerusalem all his days, heaven forbid that he should be branded a heretic. Quite the contrary. He is to be considered as if he lives and resides within Jerusalem. For this reason, the name Jerusalem is never explicitly mentioned in the Torah, only alluded to with the words, the place that God will choose. For everywhere offerings are burnt and offered up to my name, and any place can fall under the umbrella of the place which God chose.
So the Torah is alluding to a time where maybe the Jews don't have a physical Jerusalem, but they still need to create a place that God will choose. And that will be the place that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests. And that's why for 2,000 years we held on to it. You quoted, what did King David say in Psalms? This is a famous text, text 13. Yeah, text 13.
If
Yeah.
I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its strength. Let my tongue cling to my palate if I fail to recall you, if I fail to elevate Jerusalem above my highest joy.
And it's a lot of songs in modern Israel have these words from Psalms. But what we're discussing here, this was more than nationalism. You can't be just nationalistic for 2,000 years. It's like, all right, we're not there anymore. 2,000 years to be It was about what Jerusalem embodies and how to be able to have that elsewhere. And this was also sort of formulated in Jewish law. How? Where are we? Do the next text, text
When a
123.
person rises to pray, if he is in the diaspora, he should turn to the direction of Israel and face the direction of Jerusalem and the temple. If he is in Israel, he should face Jerusalem and the direction of the temple and the Holy of Holies. If he is Jerusalem, he should face the temple and the direction of the Holy of Holies. If he is standing behind the temple to the west, he should turn around and face east, the direction of the Holy of Holies. If he's standing to the north, he should face south, and if he's standing south, he should face north. It emerges that all Jews point their hearts to one place.
What's the message here? More important than where you're geographically located, it is where your heart is. Is your heart in the place that God chooses? Are you trying to live a life guided by those teachings? And again, with Yira Shalem, awe of God, feeling that God is in front of you wherever you go, because that is what the word Yerushalayim means, awe of God.
But you know something, Rebbe? If you think about it, all languages that are east of Israel write from right to left, and everything that is west of Israel writes from left to right. All languages point to Israel.
Hal's gonna have a, let's see.
Chinese,
Up and down.
It doesn't matter the up and down, but it's still right to left. Even Sanskrit.
Russian?
Hmm?
Russian?
Okay.
And
Russian's left to
cuneiform also.
No, Russian's left to right.
Hmm?
Russian.
Interesting.
But you're right, there are a lot of right to left.
Yeah, there are a lot. That's a very
Yeah,
neat.
But Russia, but if you remember Moscow, because we do have it in Torah, is to the left of Jerusalem. Even though if it's north, but it's left of
Part of it
Jerusalem.
is.
Part of it.
So, in short, Rebbe Tzalel answers both questions. See, the question was, why is Jerusalem not mentioned? He answered it by means of this other surprising statement in the Talmud. You live in Israel, it's whatever. You're living outside of Israel, it's like you're worshiping idols. He says it's not just the geography, it's a state of being, it's where your heart is. And that is what we do every time we daven, every time we pray. But more importantly, we're trying to build our lives that wherever we are, God can say, this is the place that I choose. And that is why the Torah calls Jerusalem 20 times in this week's Torah portion, the place that I choose. Any other questions, comments from anyone online?
Nope.
All right, a big thank you to Amnon Nissan Communications for graciously hosting this program. We will be back, God willing, next week with a very fascinating class on Parsha Shoftim, Shylock in Jewish law. So we're going to do a little Shakespeare, the story over there, and why that could not have been correct from a Jewish perspective. We will, God willing, do that next week.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.